welcome to this webinar. Are you ready for the smart lighting revolution? We're going to talk today about all things smart lighting and street lighting. We've got a lot of questions that have been sent in advance, and we're going to answer as many as we can. We've got myself, Alexi Lynch, and Paul Brown from Ironbark on the line. Any questions at any stage of the process, for those who have not been to one of these webinars before, just jump into your question box on the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will answer your questions. Okay, we're going to go through a quick rundown of the state of the states, what's going on, who's changed their lights, who owns their lights, Minimata, what does that mean, and what does it mean for council, from P to V and tariffs, and then on to some of the gutsier stuff around smart city ownership and governance, and the Australian Smart Lighting Pilot. And of course, any questions. We've got an hour all up, so we'll try and move through as quick as possible. We've got a lot of your questions in advance, which we used to shape the agenda today. There they are. You don't have to read them all now. I promise you, this is the only screen that will have lots of words, and you will also receive a copy of this presentation afterwards anyway. We're being quite transparent there with the questions that came through, so you can have a look at them, but we'll try and get to them as we move on. All right, so here's where we're at too, just in case people want to know what's going on Australia-wide. We've hit about 112 councils that have changed over to energy or have undertaken a bulk changeover, and we're actually nearing 500,000 lights. 112 odd councils, we know because we've worked with most of them, and most of you out there, all except I think 15 or 16 of those 12 councils, and we keep an eye on it. We've got a counter. So it's pretty awesome stuff, really. This puts Australia well ahead of what's happening in a lot of parts of the world, certainly well ahead of the international average, and even larger than high penetration of LEDs compared to parts of big parts of Europe and North America and Asia. If we rip around the states really quickly so people have an understanding, there's some interesting news, I think, and Paul's going to jump in here if he wants to add or correct me. So ACT, which is a very interesting and different model than others, because ACT Council is also the state government, and so they own the assets and always have owned their street lighting and electricity distribution assets, but they have just gone out to a tender. They've successfully announced the winning tenderer who is going to upgrade their LED lights. That's correct, Paul? We're involved in that tender process, is that correct? Yeah, they've got a 7-year energy performance contract, which is essentially an LED installation and maintenance tender. The successful tenderer was electric, and they're now in the process of working out the rollout program and obviously onboarding that contractor, which is very exciting. Fantastic. Big part of their 2020 100% renewable energy campaign too. In the Northern Territory, there's been a bit of changeover because there's been the movement of the assets from NT Power and Water to those councils that were interested in retaining the assets. Again, just noting that the distribution business is actually state-owned, which means that it was a bit more straightforward than it might have been or is in other states. That's Tasmania. Tasmania are killing at the moment, I understand. There's been a lot of changes, correct? Paul, yeah, where are we up to there? They've got about 30% LED penetration in the state. There's projects underway that will push that up to around 50%. So they're doing a lot of work, a lot of LED installations, and there's a fair bit of work from some of the councils in the north around smart lighting as well. In Victoria, there are 79 councils, of which 3 have not undertaken or are in the process of undertaking a bulk changeover. Are we allowed to name them? No. Okay. So there are 3. Everyone else has. So if you haven't done it, something's not quite working. And councils are moving on to B category lights, and there's a big announcement soon to be coming up through MAV with a new bulk tender panel. Hang on a minute. Someone's saying, hey, should we be seeing the presentation? Yeah, you really should be. Steve, thank you for being the one who was on board and watching. You haven't missed much. This is the number of lights that have been changed. And we're going through the state of the states again, so you haven't missed much there apart from a beautiful picture of David Boone. And we're going through Victoria, as I just mentioned. Thank you, very alert there. In WA, I'm not really sure, but I know that we've received some information from some councils seeking assistance, so possibly there's some change there. And I know that the Horizon and Western Power did recently send information to councils about potential new approved LEDs, very similar technology to the ones that are being rolled out in other states without actually giving the names away. In Queensland, Paul?
So there's been a lot of work happening in Queensland. Usually what we find in each state is it takes 1 to 2 years of negotiation and collaboration between councils and power companies to get projects over the line. Queensland have been spurred into action, and it's fair to say that they're a long way down that track now, and we would expect to see some decent projects over the next 12 to 18 months.
Looking at the attendees, most of us know who we are, but those don't. So we actually do work with councils in every single one of these states. Queensland's an interesting one too, because they were spending a lot of time trying to retain ownership of the lights, but given the decision by Networks Queensland or Ergon and Energex, whatever they're called now, about 18 months ago said it's not going to happen. So Queensland councils have really started to move, working with the DBs to change over as well. South Australia, apologies, South Australian council putting that up there, but there's been a lot of change in the last 12 to 18 months. SAP and councils have been working really closely together, and from a situation where this time last year there were 0 LED lights up there, at least on scale, there's now 20, 30,000. South Australia is a very special case. We've actually got another webinar later today to talk about what's going on there. So if you're a South Australian council, I'd suggest you leave now. You can email me and I'll send you a link to the one later on this afternoon. And finally, in New South Wales, these photos are really cheeky, apologies. Sorry, we'll make it a bit easier for everyone. In New South Wales, there are 3 different distribution businesses. I think it's fair to say that Endeavour is the gold star of how to actually undertake these projects. There's the highest number of LEDs and smart ready or smart enabled LEDs that are going up. Is that correct, Paul?
Listen, there have been decent LED volumes installed in Ausgrid as well as part of a maintenance program. And Essential Energy and their councils are in negotiation currently about rollout. So there's different action in the different distribution areas. In the Endeavour region, they're the one that's rolling out bulk upgrades for their councils, but we certainly expect to see that in all the other areas shortly.
A few questions that have come through, and some that came in advance that are related to this. And I guess on that one, someone says they've heard that in Ausgrid anyway, they can't do it because there's a really large residual value or written down value. Is that your understanding?
So written down values are an issue in every jurisdiction. Ausgrid, the value of their written down value is certainly not higher than other regions like Queensland, for example. When doing business cases for councils in the Ausgrid region, we didn't see written down value to be a significant barrier to the project. The project still had good business cases and paybacks, even with that, just like every other state.
And so, a related question, so that's because of 80 watts that were installed, is that what it says, 12, 13 years ago, is that correct?
So the written down value is essentially the invested money the distributor have put into the current asset, and every jurisdiction is different. In Ausgrid, in about 2003-04, the councils decided to install 80 watt mercury vapors to replace their old fluorescents. They were advised to do that. Unfortunately, at the same time in the Endeavour region, they were installing energy efficient lights. They were actually the leading region in the country at the time. And so the councils have some legacy issues there, but they have installed 80 watters as new products over the last 5 to 10 years. But nonetheless, it's still, their business case is good in Ausgrid, and there shouldn't be any significant issues with rolling out upgrades.
Okay, that's interesting. So took down the CFLs and put in 80 watters. A few other questions that have come through, I think I can answer these pretty quickly. What are my options for claiming carbon credits through the Emissions Reduction Fund? Limited, but there, if you are looking at undertaking a bulk changeover project, there are still 0 projects that have successfully been part of the Emissions Reduction Fund reverse auction. You can technically, though, create the carbon credits. And we know of a handful of organisations now that are actually playing an aggregator role. So it's worth something to look into. Questions around smart cities. Someone, should I apply for the latest round of smart city funding? You could, if you're doing a straight bulk change rollout and you're looking at, having smart enabled or smart ready lights on your standard P or probably even VCAT, you're eligible. I'd be questioning how you would go on the merit criteria, looking at who won in the first round, and we've got some info online if you're interested to know who got up last time and a bit of a summary. Okay, any questions? Go to webinar control panel where it says questions, type in question, we'll answer. Minimata. So I hope I've spelled this correctly. Paul, is this image going overboard? Are we venturing into scare campaigny stuff with stranded assets? What's going on?
So let's perhaps talk a little bit about Minimata. I'm sure most of you may have heard of it, but essentially it's an international convention on limiting mercury. This will come into effect in 2020 and will mean globally there will be a significant limit to the ability to source mercury vapor lamps. The Australian government is still considering whether they're going to ratify the convention. Nonetheless, whether they sign it or not, the major producers of lighting have already signed it, which means they won't be able to export anyway. The impacts for councils and distribution businesses across the country are there's around about 900,000 mercury vapor streetlights which will become non-maintainable, i.e. stranded, and they'll need to be replaced within 3 to 4 years of that 2020 date. If they're left in the air, the light gets so dim that they're not fit for purpose. So they certainly need to be replaced by 2023, 2024. And that'll either be council or the distributor doing it.
So question here is, so won't distribution businesses, they own the lights, why won't they have to abide by it, and we'll just force them to change it?
Yes, so someone will have to change them. The question is, for councils in this regard, is who is best placed to replace them and what's the financial implications for councils? For example, in Queensland, when you run the business case of the distributor funding a bulk upgrade or the council funding a bulk upgrade, the difference in one council, for example, is a $5 million loss over 20 years if the distributor is funding it, compared to a $35 million gain if the council funds it. The key message is do your analysis, do your business cases to understand what the best model is for you. In some states, at this stage, it's really only the council who can fund it, i.e. in Victoria, but most other states, there is a distributed funded model as well.
Thanks, Paul. And I can give you a reflection of what happens in South Australia, the councils that we work with there. So it's another state where there are two models. There's the distribution business funded, or there is the council funded. I'm yet to see any example of tariff structures in any state where you're better off letting the distribution business fund. Essentially looking at the model in South Australia, for example, it's zero cost up front, which is great. However, eventually, distribution business funded doesn't mean that you don't have to pay anything ever. There's no pot of money that means they pay for it. You're just paying through the tariffs over the next 20 years. So a way that we like to talk about it in South Australia is essentially, do you want to fund it through rates, or do you want to go borrow the money? And money is very cheap now. Or if you fund it through the DNSP, you're borrowing off them. And they don't have really good interest rates. They're not a bank. And so they are allowed to make a certain return on investment. And so the cost does end up being a lot more. Okay, P to V and tariffs. So I'm going to pass to you again here, Paul. I guess firstly ask just what's going on here, and then also in the context of some questions that we received. And one of them was, how do we move forward in funding agreements for bulk replacement of cost shared lighting with main roads authorities and distribution businesses? Another one, what's going on with Vic Roads shared lighting, which is the distribution, which is the main roads? How can we change lights that are part owned? A bit of a some themes there. So what's happening with main roads or VCAT light?
So the shift has really moved on to B category. For P category, there's a fairly well-known process to deliver, and it's really just about implementing that. There are more complicated issues in B category, major roads, arterial, etc. I did mention earlier that in New South Wales and in Victoria and Queensland, the main roads authorities are the leading organisations in rolling out main road LEDs, and they're in the process of replacing and installing tens of thousands of LEDs currently. A lot of these when it comes to council assets, there is commonly a cost share agreement or some sort of way in which councils share the cost of major road lighting with the main roads authority. That adds a complexity around relationships and funding. However, there are usually still large numbers of lights that councils by themselves fund. And so there's the only barriers stopping councils from installing major road lighting are the normal barriers, i.e. approvals, design, getting the right price, getting money from council or somewhere else, and implementing. We're going to talk a little bit later on about some of the smart lighting pilots, and they'll drill into B category in particular, as well as the relationships, and you're adding an extra stakeholder generally. The other issues are around the smart lighting, because in B category, you have the opportunity to dim or increase lighting levels depending on what's going on. And so you've got an increased complexity around the design process. In terms of specific agreements between councils and main roads authorities, there are, so in Victoria, for example, Vic Roads do have an agreement where councils can implement the project and they will pay them back over 10, 12 years or so. In other states, things haven't got to that level yet, but they surely will, and will require that heads of agreement level discussion so that it's clear on who's going to fund what.
Beautiful. Someone else has asked about, they've heard that their distribution business in Ausgrid is just ploughing ahead with approvals without talking to RMS in New South Wales. And if you want to provide any information on where you heard that, but that's not true. That's absolute crap. I met with RMS a few months ago, which is the New South Wales main road, the roads authority, and they've had contact and we're speaking to Ausgrid about the next steps and how to work together. So they are talking.
Fundamentally, unless all the parties are talking together, it's very difficult to get projects up. And our experience is that it inevitably happens where there has to be discussion. At this stage, we've got a comment from Gary saying that the business case model for the major roads where you've got those different stakeholders negotiating outcomes are poor. It's a poor payback and model for councils. There are ongoing discussions between MAV in this case and Vic Roads to try and craft a better outcome. And fingers crossed that will happen.
Beautiful. Gary, if you've got any more info on that, the actual question specifically, then please send through. But certainly, if you're just paying it all up front and only receiving 40% of the actual savings, then yes, it's not as good as the business model. Next question was, what about CVJ? Don't know what you mean there. As far as negotiations, I mean, the CVJ are involved, Paul, with the negotiations with Vic Roads, the main road authority, correct? Well, they're up to speed with what's going on.
Yeah, what's happening tends to be that individual regions or councils are trying to directly negotiate with the main roads authorities and the distribution businesses. Ultimately, the best outcome is a consistent approach across that distribution region or state. So there is a role for individual councils and regions to craft a negotiation as long as that outcome is in the best interest of all the councils and everyone knows what that outcome is. So there's roles for all players of all shapes and sizes.
Another question from Guy. What are your thoughts regarding third-party funded options? excellent question. This changes, and it would be different 3 months ago to 6 months ago to 12 months ago. We have a situation in ACT, as we discussed before. There are significant barriers, and there had been over the last decade in regards to the ownership of the asset, obviously. What's the latest with that, Paul? Can you tell us more, or do you have to wait until there are announcements coming up?
Well, it's pretty simple for council. You either find the money from your rate or your capital budget, or you borrow the money. When you've got a third party like a main roads authority, then it's better. The best outcome is that organisation is finding their own money. Councils have the opportunity to access lots of different funding options and models for their particular project, and it's really up to them and their finance teams to work that through. We do sit down and talk with the councils about these different models, but ultimately it'll be up to the council to identify which funding model they're open to. We would like to see a situation where there is a consistent, clear, simple suite of options at a regional level, but that will only happen when there's agreement between councils and the main roads authority. And we're specifically talking about VCAT roads here. For P categories, councils are just off and running. They're doing it without needing to craft that agreement.
I guess if the guy happy to chat afterwards, if it was more of a question around getting third-party financiers, then there have been challenges in the past. Certainly, there are a lot of borrowing options though, and from PCAT, yeah, I don't know. My view is that there's no real excuse anymore. I know that might sound a bit harsh for not having undertaken your PCAT, like or being in the process of it. You can do it. You can do it now, and so you've got 18 months before Minimata's probably in anyway.
You need to do it.
So you need to do it. And a quick question from Glen Iro. Does our current project for major road street lighting meet the federal Smart Cities grant requirements? The quick question that is yes, it meets the requirements. It probably isn't going to be successful, would be my guess, but happy to chat offline about that and I can explain why. We get this question a lot, and I guess it comes up again because tariffs are increasing, and this is how often we get this question here. We went and found some old articles when, from back in the day, we were responding to questions about concern about increasing street lighting tariffs, and this was from other, I guess, street lighting stakeholders and advisors that were talking about these sort of 50% and 50% price increases. And it's really interesting to look back now, 5, 6, 7 years down the track at what actually happened. LEDs that, for example, were never going to be used in Victoria, or alarm bells if you go down certain ways because tariffs or the OMR or the maintenance is just going to go up so far. No, it doesn't always happen. Look, generally, most things in life increase, but we see the opposite situation in a few. And this is real data from last year or the year before. What are we at? 2 years ago now. This is the prices that we have in these 5 Victorian distribution businesses. So they will often increase, but it's often a lot more nuanced than that. And they absolutely do not always increase. I'm going to call absolute bullshit on that.
So every 5 years, distribution businesses get to put up a proposal to the Australian Energy Regulator, which resets the prices or changes them. In the last few years, we've seen current proposals, for example, Tasmania prices are going up quite a lot. Endeavour Energy in New South Wales prices are going down. As you can see there for Victoria, prices have gone down in general. And so it does vary depending on the state, and it depends on how well councils have not only argued during the price review process, but how good their relationship with the distributors are, so these issues can be discussed before the distributor puts up the model to the AR.
In South Australia, as of in 2 weeks' time in July, they're going to go up a lot, 10, 12% in 1 year. So they do often rise, but they don't always rise though. All right, smart city governance and ownership. Poll time. We can do polls on this. What we're going to do is we're going to ask everyone to respond to this question. And hopefully it's going to come up. pretty soon. How do I do it? I launch it here. So the question for you is, you've got a precinct or a certain area within your council area, and you're going to go out to tender for a smart lighting provider. Someone's going to install and manage, develop the software, whatever it might be, in a certain area. Would you invite the distribution business to be part of the tender process and on the evaluation panel? Let them know you're undertaking the process. Just consider their needs, or just not liaise with them at all. Please tick one of the boxes. You're not held to any of these. We just want to get a bit of an indication of what you would do and where councils sit on that. Let's get a few more. This poll's been up for a few seconds. Give you another 10. Let's get them up. All you have to do is click one of those buttons. You're sitting there. It's your call. You're the one. You're about to go out. You've got a really busy shopping centre area. Do you want to get the DEB on board and part of the tender evaluation panel so you make sure you know what they want? Or is it a matter of just letting them know or just getting it out there? Come on. 5 seconds. Last vote. Click one, please. Okay. Here's the result. Interesting. So most people would invite them to be part of the tender process and evaluation. I didn't expect that. That's very interesting. Others would at least let them know, and some not liaise with them in advance. Okay. Now, might be asking why we put that up there, and we'll get to this now. Okay. Smart lighting governance ownership. And we get to vesting and gifting and that old chestnut. Those who have been in street lighting for a while will be very familiar with those terms. This is a perfect world. A lot of good stuff happening. Peace on earth. That might be your perfect world. It's different things for different people. Possibly for local governments and smart cities. It's having ownership or control of your lights. That's a fascinating photo on the bottom right. That looks like the youngest mayor in the history of the world. The perfect world. So having control and being able to do everything that you want when you want as a council. And that choice might be that you put it to someone else, third parties or distribution businesses or whatever it might be. Mine. You know I'm doing these, Paul?
I don't know. You tell me, Lex.
I really hope, let's not repeat this and have the arguments around ownership of smart city infrastructure and smart city data. A lot of the discussions that we hear and we see happening is still around this mind. Who's going to own it? Who's going to own it? Who's going to own it? Negotiations are going to have to continue, and the working with distribution businesses will absolutely continue. There's a question we asked a few years ago. The councils and DBs like a married couple, and yep, they still are going to be. And DBs need to be involved and councils need to be involved in working together. There's a marriage counsellor, of course, in the AER and other authorities. But the key is what's happening at the moment is the other party, if you like, DNSPs, are going out or have gone out to tender for smart city providers. So this is South Australia and SAPN. Very good question, Gary. Are any DNSPs tuned into this presentation? I'm not sure whether it's because the slides are a little cheeky or because we want to know what's going on, but we do have one or two. They can comment just like you can as well. But I guess this went out last year, 12 months ago. So SAPN, who can control all the lights or the majority of the lights in South Australia, put out an RFP to seek proposals from pre-qualified smart lighting solutions. Now, councils were not involved in the development of that tender proposal. They're not on the tender evaluation committee or anything like that. And similar situations are happening in other areas. It's not that what they're going out for is necessarily bad or not going to be in the best interest of councils. And from what we've seen and working pretty closely in relationship on behalf of councils with SAPN, for example, they're on the right track. But there's no official role for councils at the moment. there are situations where councils are working closely with distribution businesses. Paul, do you want to talk to this slide just briefly, because this is what's been happening in the City Power Core area?
Yeah, so councils, Vic Roads and City Power Core have been working together for 4 or 5 years, and they have a quarterly forum which talks about street lighting issues. A year or so ago, the forum came up with a key series of areas they want to work together on around the governance of smart lighting. And what does that mean? So, and I guess the thing that really resonates in this discussion is that the group unanimously agreed that the key thing driving all of this and how the group addresses smart lighting should be what is in the benefit of the customers, the residents. And then really that really high level policy decision as a group really drives all future discussions and all future approaches around smart lighting. Just having that written down and having the people in the room agree to it makes a lot of sense. This slide here now shows some of the detail of the areas that were discussed and the sort of things that were looked at and how they would be addressed. And any discussion between councils, main roads authorities and distributors really needs to get into the detail of what about all these things? How do we deal with this? How do we deal with data and standards and sensors and all the rest? Who else needs to be involved and how does that work? And there are models around how that liaison and that collaboration works. It's still early days. There aren't the answers to how they work, but there is agreement in this case on working on the questions together.
And there was a question that we've received, DNSP's position on smart tech on major road street lighting, regulation, data ownership, privacy, So I guess, as Paul said, early days, but in some, and this is a discussion that is continuing now in City Power Core, I suggest that there is a way that this could work for your council, wherever you are in your distribution business. And essentially, just hypothetically, just getting a few first principles together and sitting down and talking about it, because otherwise, if you look at the situation in South Australia, and I really stress that the distribution business there has actually been really open and working with the councils, and we've got good people, luckily, that we as councils can work with, but it's sort of possibly based on the personal relationships that have been built there over the last few years, and there's no official role for council to play. A much better approach would be to sit down with them through a formal process and start discussing some of the things that are important to council. If not, the horse starts bolting, and certainly in some situations, it possibly has already. Get to the table. All right. Kylie, you've got an interesting question there, but I'll come back to you around the increase in LED prices, specifically in Power Core. There are a few specific things that happened in the Power Core region, things that hadn't been costed previously, but I might have to take that one offline if that's all right. Okay, Australian smart lighting pilot. We're on time, Paul.
All right.
Over to you.
Okay, so in terms of smart lighting, what we're going to talk about now is where is the value? We're potentially spending another $100, $200 per light for this mythical smart lighting system in a street lighting installation. What's the value? Why would we do this? And also, who's active, who's doing what, and how can my council or my region get on board with this? Before going into that, the things to keep in mind is the smart lighting system is really made up of 3 main components. One is the sensor itself. In the majority of cases for street lighting, we're talking about a smart PE cell, which allows control of the light, whether it's working or not, as well as turning on and off. There's a communication network, which essentially collects that data and then shoots it somewhere else. And then you've got some sort of management software on your phone, your tablet, your computer, which allows you to interact with the phone. So those 3 components are really what a smart lighting system is. It can be on a small scale, i.e. in one shopping centre, or it could be across the whole state. I'm going to talk about a specific project just to get you in the mood for what the value might be for smart lighting. Wyndham, you're in the mood? Good. So urban heat is something that more and more councils are caring about. These two pictures here are, on the left, you have satellite imagery, and on the right, it's aerial photography of heat in a specific area. The challenge with getting urban heat data is data that is nuanced enough, local level, so you can see what's happening in actual streets or local areas, but is real time. Both of these images here are one-off pictures. So you have to pay, $5 grand for the satellite imagery or thereabouts, 5 to 10 grand, and then 30 to 50 to 100 grand for an aerial survey. So, and the issue is that you have to do that periodically to see what's going on. Wyndham City are currently doing an urban heat street lighting pilot. What that involves is to have 1,000 street lights up in the air with smart PE cells. In those PE cells are temperature sensors, which will be able to provide data on temperature in that location. There is potential to roll these sensors out across every street light everywhere. The good thing is that the temperature data came with the sensors without additional cost. It is part of the PE cell getting this temperature data. So the question is, what do we do with the data? And the pilot is trying to answer one specific thing, and that is, what is the correlation between the temperature in the PE cell and the temperature on the ground? So there's obviously a heat source with the light. When electricity is being used there, there's potential other impacts on the heat in the light. What this trial is trying to do is just make sure we can actually use that temperature data and it correlates to an indicative temperature on the ground. Once we do that, then you can essentially start creating real-time heat maps. And you can understand straight away in a particular region, particular street, particular house, what the temperature is in that location. The question then comes back to, what's the value of that? Well, the value is whatever you can think of. So for example, it will directly impact on how we design streets. We can install certain traffic treatments. We can design footpaths in a different way and then find out what is the impact along this stretch of road and then use that to innovate and design different ways of designing streets. We could use it to target the areas that we're going to check up on if there's a heat wave and make sure elderly, young people are okay during that period of time. We could provide the data to someone else who does that. And ultimately, we would certainly expect this to impact on strategic design processes. So how do you design whole precincts and whole suburbs?
I've got a question or two here that I think are more broad. Maybe we'll touch on them a bit as well, Paul. So what's the latest technology in smart lighting and who is using it now? Looking for an overview of the key issues, technologies and the means to speed up the process. And I guess this is the means to speed up the process. From our point of view, I guess, and I know this is a bit of a wanky term, but this is where the rubber hits the road. So there's so much talk, there's so much noise around smart cities and smart lighting. What we want to really do here and what this is doing, this is a real life example, is zeroing in on smart lighting in particular and how it's actually going to benefit council. Not one of the 15,642 things that could be done that you hear about or someone's talking about at a conference, but the things that are going to be valuable to an Australian local government now, tomorrow, and in the next few years.
Yep. And the question is, they're really good questions. And the answer is generally, smart lighting feels good, but we don't know actually what the benefit is. And we can't put a dollar value and we can't put a, to expend an additional $1 million or an additional $50 million across the country. It needs better data, it needs better information. We've been working with Vic Roads and some of the other providers, councils and others, to develop a smart street lighting strategic approach, which essentially starts to map out these key areas we need to know about in order to understand and identify that value. We're going to talk a little bit about some of these specific areas, just so you have a better sense of what is the value of smart lighting, where are the things that my council needs to have a look at, or what do I need to keep an eye on over the next year or two. Again, the main approach around this is identifying value. So these are some high-level areas that we've currently identified. There will be more, and we'll talk through each of these briefly. So, other pilot projects. Other than Wyndham, we've looked at all of these different areas. I've put this priority scoring table up just to give you a sense of what we're judging these different value propositions on. So across the top is street lighting the right technology to deliver this value? Across the left is what is that value? Is it high, is it medium, is it low? First one is dimming. So this is a real example of a real council in Melbourne where we're starting to work through how do you deal with dimming in street lighting. The top left, figure 18, shows you what the current compliance levels are. Green means it's V3, yellow means it is V5, and red means it's not compliant to V5. When you put LEDs in, the top right, you see actually compliance levels generally improve. You're getting more areas that are compliant, but you've still got some areas that are non-compliant. The bottom left is then how do you make everything compliant? And that's usually a mix of putting more lights in or increasing the wattage of the current lights that are installed. From that base of a V3 level or a V5 level, you can then dim down. So you can then adjust each light and reduce it. We have a specific council that's looking at this now. They're looking at it for I think it's 30 key intersections, key locations. And the question will be, how much extra is this going to cost us from a capital perspective? And then what is the ongoing benefit, both from a road safety benefit, but also reduced energy when you dim down and better control?
And here's a question. So there's a few around dimming that we had. The trend towards dimming lights is really interesting. Please tell me more. Another one, what about dimming for residential streets? But while we're on this one in the VCAT, is it possible to just dim all of the lights at once? Do you have to go to this level, or can you just go street by street? We're going to dim this one and we're going to dim this street.
So you cannot have a consistent dimming approach across the whole municipality.
You can't just say these 30 lights here or these, all of our VCATs are going to be dimmed at the same time or to a certain...
No. So you can change categories. So you can go from V3 to V5, but that will mean adjusting settings on each light separately.
Yep.
You'd essentially set up a system where it's done online, and you just have it's automatically done. You just need to do the design work once and the calibration once, but you need to look at each individual light and its purpose. You can't have a general rule of thumb for dimming. In terms of this priority level that I mentioned earlier, this is level 5, level 6 is the highest. The only reason it's not level 6 is that the value is probably medium. It may end up shifting into high depending on road safety benefits. The key thing is you would need to do this as part of design for all major road projects if you want dimming.
Keep the questions coming. The go-to webinar control panel, just jump in there and type away. So another one, Paul, what about residential lights? Can we dim them?
So you could definitely do a similar analysis in residential areas. All the projects we deliver, the vast majority, you do a compliance assessment. If there's overlighting currently, then certainly you could dim individual lights down. There is much less opportunity for dimming in residential streets because the lighting levels are usually very low.
And what about just turning them all off?
You could turn them off.
Haven't heard that one before.
No, and then you would need to just manage all the risks associated with turning lights off, which we can talk to you about if you like. There is no council currently in Australia looking at doing that. All right, just one thing that's relevant to this is that the federal government is doing some great work around putting in a new type of meter. This will probably take 12 to 18 months to get through, but essentially what that means is when you do dim or increase the lighting, the electricity cost will be adjusted accordingly. Currently, for unmetered installations, you will not get the energy benefits. You won't get the reduction in your energy bill because of the metering arrangements. But the federal government is doing a lot of work to push that through, and we would expect within 12 to 18 months the council to be able to benefit from that. Adaptive lighting, essentially, you could call dimming a type of adaptive lighting, but it also means increasing lighting levels. So an example of increasing lighting levels is there where you might want to have brighter lights because there's a festival, street festival in that particular location. You may want to increase lighting levels if there's a serious accident or for other reasons. For adaptive lighting, it is probably a lower priority. You're certainly not getting the dollar value from an engineering perspective as dimming because it'll be more isolated to certain locations, but there could be significant cultural benefits. Again, this is built into the normal design process for major road design. Road safety is probably has the most potential for benefit. To consider this, road safety is essentially about trying to stop cars hitting things. That's right. I should.
Called Don't Let Cars Hit Things.
Yeah. This image here essentially shows you that stopping distance is based on thinking, then braking. And lighting makes people be aware of something in front of them much quicker. So there's direct benefits from lighting. There's direct benefits from maintaining lights, for example. So one of the exciting things about smart lighting is we will know about faults quicker. And that potentially directly impacts on road safety. So one of the pilots that's important to start building a database around is road safety. What's one thing that's important to consider is that in different jurisdictions, depending on the current maintenance practices, this will have different impacts. The worse the current maintenance practices are, i.e. the slower it takes to change a light, the better the road safety impacts will be from smart lighting. Asset management is another area where there's significant value for councils and also distributors. What we're really talking about here is the software end of it and making sure we've got a process where you don't have staff having to log every single complaint or every single project issue. There's actually some automation in the fault reporting process. And a pilot would look at what is the actual benefit? How much time are we saving? What's the benefit for my council? What's the benefit potentially for distributors or others around smart lighting infrastructure? And again, really trying to drill down to, is it worth putting in smart lighting across the world? And what is this value proposition? How many hours are we saving? Or not, maybe it increases.
How would a pilot look like for this? If the council says, I'm interested in this.
Yep.
How does this happen?
So the first thing to keep in mind is that you would need to understand what is the current smart lighting system that's available to that council. It may be nothing. Yep. So it would require a process where you're working closely with the distribution business to understand the sorts of information that is being provided, how the interaction between the distributor and the council and the community occurs currently, and streamlining that. So it's almost a process design activity. So a pilot is streamlining a process. And that could well take 6 or 12 months to work its way through. The good thing is that once you've worked that through with one council in one distribution area, that then becomes a template that can be rolled out. You're not necessarily having to do 650 pilots in every single council. Once you've got a really good approach in a given area, then that should be just built into the projects and built into the rollout process. You're not having to do pilots. Okay, so we've only been talking about lighting, directly related lighting projects. The other areas that are interesting in non-lighting, so we've mentioned the heat mapping, urban heat on the left. On the right is a small town that's got lots of smoke from wood fires. It is possible to put air quality sensors on lights and get a much more nuanced understanding of air quality. So that could have impacts on things like understanding if there's a bushfire in a certain location, understanding whether a particular council or state government even needs to come down much harder or provide incentives to reduce pollution in that location. So at the moment, we don't have great data. Often the data is either one-off or isolated. I think it costs around about, Powercore have done some studies around this, looking at actual air quality sensors related to street lighting, and it costs something like $20 to $30 per light extra to put a sensor on it. We're not talking a lot of money. Again, then you'd have similar issues around just clarifying where's the data, how do we use it, who's interested in it, and what's the value there. This priority level is a little bit lower than some of the others, and the reason it's a little bit lower is that we're not sure whether it is the ideal technology, whether street lighting is the right place to put these sensors, or they could be put somewhere else. There would certainly need to be some local design. If these were going to be rolled out en masse, you wouldn't necessarily be putting it in every light. It might be 1 in 10, or it might only be certain towns. The other sorts of non-lighting value propositions really connect into this smart city Internet of Things. So things like CCTV, pedestrian traffic counting, and generally telecommunications infrastructure is at an appropriate location to put in a relay station or some other sort of telecommunications product. This is a pretty big can of worms, and the key question will be the same as with air quality: is street lighting the right technology or the right location for this functionality? And the only way to find out is to do some and to install some. So one of the main questions we'll be asking is it cheaper to do it by adding something to a street light? That could be value proposition by itself. These sorts of technologies will be installed and are being rolled out. And the question is street lighting the right one of the suite of technologies to deliver this through?
All right, thanks, Paul. Before we go into that, I've just got another question which is related to the temperature quality cameras. That's sort of a question, Brett, if you want to elaborate. It just says CapEx and OpEx for sensors on unmetered street lights, which I think is not actually a question, but...
Okay. So just very high level. So the CapEx, as mentioned, temperature, we're not talking about extra CapEx. Air quality, yes, there is some additional costs for that. Most of these other sensors on this slide, there are additional costs associated with that. The question in a pilot will be, is it cheaper to do it through a street lighting project than to separately install it? So that'll be one of the answers that you get in terms of value.
Great. Thank you. So that's a great summary of, I guess, some of the areas. And this poll time, we just want to get an indication of the interest, I guess. And this doesn't, again, hold anyone to ransom of what you want to do or us getting in contact with you or anything like that. It's just to get an idea about the areas that councils feel there would be value. And the question is, which of these pilots would be most relevant for your council? You can select as many of these as possible, but the ones that Paul has just outlined. So dimming, is that of interest? The adaptive lighting, road safety, asset management, or the non-lighting pilot?
It's interesting having this discussion with different councils. It is interesting how different councils are interested in different things. Some are not particularly interested in dimming. That's their main interest. Some are mostly interested in saving time for asset managers. Some are particularly interested in CCTV. It's one of those ones where we are finding high variation in the interest levels. So it'll be interesting to see what you all vote.
There's only 30% voted. We're not going to move on until we get that number up a bit. So please give us an indication. This has been done through a fair bit of research, the work that Paul's been doing and we've been doing with MAV and councils to get an idea about the sort of project areas. Is this on the right track? A really good question that came in from Darren, which is around EV charging points on some street lighting poles users can plug into when away from home. This occurs in the UK. It absolutely can occur here. And now, have you got any comment on that? I guess that would come under the non-lighting sort of pilots.
Generally speaking, what we're seeing most councils heading towards is for high-profile precincts, looking at smart poles, which might have multi-function outcomes from Wi-Fi, street lighting, and charging, whether that's vehicles or laptops or whatever. And then so we're talking maybe 2% of outdoor lights like that. And then the 98% is a large-scale rollout process that needs to use a relatively standardised product suite in order to reduce costs.
If you haven't voted, please do. This doesn't track anything to you, even. The questions we get in the end of this, and go to webinar says something saying to you as this person's question. The polls don't, but we can send this through and everyone will receive it afterwards as well. So everyone has an idea about the sort of projects that councils are interested in. So if you haven't jumped in on that poll, please have a think. Dimming, adaptive lighting, road safety, asset management, non-lighting pilots. Okay. Asset management, bearing in mind, of course, there could be multiple. It's a big one. Road safety, a little bit less for adaptive lighting, dimming, and non-lighting pilots. What do you think about that, Paul?
Well, that's probably about what I would have expected.
Yep.
Ultimately, the most interesting one around that is that the purpose of street lighting is road safety. And so that's the one that actually, if we didn't care about road safety, you wouldn't have street lighting at all. And it's probably the area where you've got the highest value proposition. But this reflects the actual work people have to do who are online. So asset managers, energy managers, they'll be the areas that are related directly to your job.
All right, thank you. All right, so what we're going to do this now, so we've got questions. We might have to get some of those questions afterwards. Thank you for sending them. After this webinar, what we're going to do is send round a feedback form, basically to get an idea about what you thought about this and whether this is of interest. And you need to fill in that feedback form if you would like to get a copy of this presentation and the survey results, etc. What we're also going to be doing is putting out an expression of interest with a bit more information. So we'll be asking whether you're actually interested in being involved in taking the discussion further. In fact, that's not really true. Stopping the discussion and moving into the actual doing and the action side of things. So we're pretty interested in councils that want to deliver these projects. There's been a lot of talk around smart lighting for quite a long time, and we're pretty keen on adding to those 112 odd councils that have delivered street lighting energy efficiency projects to look at those that are actually going to start delivering smart lighting pilots that can be of value to everyone.
Just to put this in a little bit of context, when asking councils these sorts of questions, we tend to find maybe 10% of councils are interested in taking this next step of drilling into some of these areas in order to help the whole industry learn. So it's not for everyone, but it is certainly something that's relevant for any councils who want to, I guess, step up and take a more leadership approach. It's exactly the right time now to be leading the knowledge gathering and generation process, to be talking directly to your distributor about how all these systems and processes work, and making sure we're getting the best outcome for the communities that we serve.
Someone just asked an idea of the cost for these sort of pilot projects.
So our experience, so looking at say 5 or 6 different pilot projects, is that it's great to have actual lights that you're putting up and installing. A budget around 50 grand, including 30 or 40% of that would be related to hardware and installation, is something to budget for. That's a reasonable size. You can do things that are smaller than that, but to be honest, you start missing the ability to analyse the data properly and get a good outcome.
Thanks, Paul. That's a bit of a missed slide in there. Okay, that is it. If you have any other questions, please keep them coming. We'll send them through afterwards. Our details are on the bottom. Before you go, there are a few other things that we're just involved in at the moment. And if you're working at a council interested in broader emissions reduction, you might be interested in some of these. There's a webinar next Tuesday that Sustainability Victoria are putting on that every council in Australia is allowed to come to, which is talking around science-based emissions reduction targets. There's a free report online, the Australian Local Government Climate Review, that we developed with ICLEI and BZE. Download it. You don't have to do anything. You just click on it and it'll download straight away. And also, if you haven't signed up, most of you here have received this information about this webinar because you were on our newsletter mailing list. We don't really send that often, and we try not to send things that are going to be boring. It's only valuable info, but you'll miss these discussions if you're not on the newsletter. So jump on, sign up, please, just from our website. Otherwise, that's it for now. We'll be sending a feedback form in the next day or two, and then expressions of interest for the pilots themselves, and finally the presentation if you would like to receive it. That's it from now. Have a great day. We will chat to you soon. Bye.